She made me merrier, with my father's pistol pressed under her own jaw. The chapel was a ruin, rain falling through the broken roof, one red candle on the altar, and the marriage register open beneath my rosary. Audley stood in ivory and would not lower the gun until I said the words. She had already poisoned the father and the brother who each tried to hand her to another man. Sooner than let me refuse her, she would die at that altar and make me watch. I spoke the vow. If you love murderous brides and cursed vampire priests, follow for more. Now, where were we? Chapter 1. The heartbeat I could not count. The black rosary cut my palm on the 37th bead. I knew the number because counting was the oldest kindness I knew how to offer. 42 beats while a butcher confessed striking his wife. 61 while a fevered child bled through a cloth held under his nose. 78 while a widow described the warm spill from her husband's throat after the mill blade caught him. I counted until the human body became arithmetic, and arithmetic did not tempt me. The woman beyond the grill spoiled the method before she said a word. One white-gloved hand rested on the kneeler. Beneath the carved screen, straight platinum hair lay across the black marble in a pale river, too long to belong to anyone who had ever needed to dress herself without assistance. Rain moved against the stained glass behind her. The votive flames trembled in their cups, red upon red, and somewhere in the cathedral roof, a gutter overflowed with a soft, regular tapping. Her heart was not regular. No illness troubled it. No fear hurried it. The rhythm was calm, almost insolent, and I lost the count when she leaned nearer the lattice. My thumb stopped.
You stopped listening before I said anything.
Her voice was low and cultivated, with none of the false humility people carried into confession when they hoped God might be impressed by their manners. She sounded as though she had entered a room she owned and found the furniture inconveniently arranged. I loosened my grip on the beads. A dark line had opened across the old scar in my left palm. The scent of my own blood was thin and metallic. It did nothing to me. Hers did, though I had not yet seen it.
Begin when you are ready.
I was ready before I came.
A pearl button clicked. She drew one glove off finger by finger and laid it over the hand still resting on the kneeler. The bare hand that replaced it was small, porcelain pale and steady. 2 fingertips bore pinprick marks, old enough to have closed. I watched one finger enter the square opening beneath the grill. Not far. Only to the first joint. Her pulse beat there, close enough that the body I had disciplined for 12 years answered before my mind could invent a prayer. I saw a brown-red mark beneath an empty chair. I saw my father's sleeve falling away from his wrist. I heard a pistol report inside a winter room. The images came and vanished so quickly that the cathedral seemed to tilt around them. My canine teeth pressed painfully against the inside of my mouth. I lowered my face so she would not see the change through the screen.
Have you come to confess?
I have come to discover whether the rumors are true.
Which rumors?
That you never look at the women who speak to you.
There are reasons for the screen.
So there are.
Her fingertip remained in the opening.
Do you know who I am?
There were few people in Irendor who did not know the name Audley Bellamont, even if they had never seen her face. The unmarried Marquess. The girl who inherited a great estate before her 25th year. The daughter who had buried her father after a sudden seizure, and her elder brother after a second, remarkably similar illness. Suitors praised her sweetness in public and withdrew their proposals in private. Servants lasted either a lifetime in her house or less than a week. The priests called the rest gossip. The kitchen maids called it foxglove.
Lady Billamont.
Her pulse changed by one beat, satisfaction, perhaps. I could hear a body respond. I could not hear why.
And now you know what I might confess.
You have confessed nothing.
Neither have you.
I should have ended it then. I should have rung for Ephraim, opened the door, and let rank become another person's difficulty. Instead, I watched the bare finger beneath the grill and listened for the next beat, as though it had been promised to me. She withdrew her hand first. The small loss of sound was worse than its nearness.
I will return to Laurel.
There are other confessors.
I noticed.
The booth door opened. Silk whispered over stone. I waited until her heartbeat had crossed the transept before leaving my side of the confessional, which was cowardice dressed as caution, and therefore familiar to me. She stood beneath the red window, fastening her glove. Her face was more harmless than rumor had any right to be. Large, pale blue eyes softly rounded and lowered at the outer corners. A heart-shaped face. Feathered bangs resting above fine brows. Her mouth was full and pink, with a small curve at each corner that could have been kindness if one did not look at how still the rest of her remained. Her hair reached her knees. A narrow silver comb shaped like foxglove bells held back only one section. The rest fell loose over an ivory gown and pooled against the black floor. She looked at my bleeding hand, not my face. Then she smiled. The following evening, I gave my confession duty to Father Serdon and told Ephraim that a fever had begun behind my eyes. Ephraim Bell had worked in the cathedral long enough to know that priests lied more efficiently than penitents. He was a short, stooped man with silver white hair, clouded brown eyes, and thickened knuckles from keys, lamps, and winter's stone. He looked at my perfectly steady hands.
A fever.
Yes.
Does it object to one particular parishioner?
I need the crypt prepared.
His mouth tightened.
That was not my question.
I left before he could ask another. I remained in the sacristy through evening prayers, sorting linens that did not require sorting and counting the heartbeats in the nave through 2 walls. The substitute confessor heard 5 penitents. A mother hushed a child. An old man coughed into wool. Rain started again after the final hymn. 1 heartbeat remained when all the others moved toward the doors. I knew it before I admitted whose it was. Ottilie had refused the substitute. She sat through the whole service without approaching the booth, and when I opened the sacristy door, she was waiting in the narrow corridor with her gloved hands folded over a moonstone pendant.
You are ill.
So I am told.
You look much as you did yesterday.
You should go home, my lady.
Should I?
A young footman hurried in from the rain, breathless and hatless.
My lady, the driver said the south road is flooding. We oughta...
She turned her head. The boy stopped so abruptly his wet boots slid on the flagstone.
I asked you to remain with the carriage.
The horses were becoming restless.
Did you disobey me?
His throat worked.
I thought...
Did you disobey?
Yes, my lady.
Your final wages will be paid before dawn. Tell Mrs. Vale you are dismissed.
She did not raise her voice. She did not insult him. She did not even watch him absorb the fact that his place, income, and beat had ceased to belong to him. She simply turned back to me while he stood in the corridor dripping rain onto the stone.
You have frightened him.
He frightened the horses.
He came to warn you.
He came because he decided his judgment replaced mine.
The footman's pulse hammered behind her. Audley's remained even.
You should leave.
Her gaze dropped to the rosary in my hand. I had not remembered taking it from my pocket.
You stopped at 37.
The dismissed man was still standing behind her. Rain struck the high windows. My thumb rested on the same bead it had occupied the night before. I closed my fist around the rosary. She did not move. Chapter 2. The Rosary over her pulse. For 9 days, Audley Bellamont appeared wherever my routine required me to be. She did not chase me through corridors or send perfume-soaked notes. She sat beneath the south arcade while I distributed bread, arrived at the burial yard when I was blessing a mason's grave, and once stood under the cathedral steps in a silver-blue gown while sleet gathered in her impossible hair. She asked nothing on those occasions. She observed where I placed my hands, how long I remained near an open wound, and which doors Ephraim locked after dark. I altered my hours. She altered hers. This might have continued until I abandoned the cathedral entirely if she had not chosen morning mass to end the game. Cold gray light filled the nave. The congregation wore winter brown, charcoal, and old black, so her ivory gown made her look like a candle set among ashes. Her platinum hair had been gathered over one shoulder and still reached beyond the pew. Both gloves were on when she knelt. During the final blessing, she moved into the aisle last. I could not refuse her without making a scene. She bowed her head, all pale lashes and modest posture, while 3 elderly women waited behind her with prayer books pressed to their chests. I touched 2 fingers to her brow. Her heartbeat filled my mouth. The pulse at her exposed throat was half a hand from my face. She wore an open square neckline edged in translucent lace, decent by every social measure and indecent only to the particular thing I was. The scent beneath her skin had changed since the confessional. Warmer. Familiar. My hand lingered 1 second too long. Her eyes lifted. The women behind her saw only a priest blessing a noblewoman. Audley saw the garnet ring darken around my pupils.
Thank you, Father.
After the nave emptied, she remained beside the front pew.
A private blessing.
No.
You have not heard the request.
I have heard enough of your requests.
That must be why you answer the ones I do not make.
I took the black rosary from my sleeve because touching it had become instinct whenever she shortened the distance between us. Her gaze followed the movement. She removed her right glove.
Lady Bellamont.
She slid the beads from my fingers before I could close them. I stood in full clerical dress beneath the saints and watched a slender human woman take the object I had used to govern myself since boyhood. She wound it twice around her bare wrist. The aged ivory crucifix settled directly over her pulse.
Return it.
You know where it is.
I do not visit private houses.
You waited behind the sacristy door until every other heartbeat had left.
The statement was absurd. My face must have shown it because her mouth softened.
You listened for me.
I had. At midnight, in the corridor outside the confessionals, I had listened for the heartbeat that did not come. I had called the silence relief and remained there for an hour. Footsteps sounded near the north transept. Audley slipped her glove back over the rosary, hiding the black beads beneath white kid leather and lace. By the time Ephraim entered carrying a stack of clean altar cloths, she had become the picture of deferential piety.
Father Severin was kind enough to advise me.
Ephraim looked from her innocent face to my empty hand. Audley curtsied and walked away. The cross emerged from beneath her cuff as she reached the doors. It rose and fell over the artery in her wrist. Ephraim set the linens down slowly.
Was it stolen?
No.
Then where is it?
Sent for repair.
He glanced after the pale figure crossing the cathedral steps.
Remarkably swift service.
I have been called to an ill parishioner.
There is a family waiting for you in the Lady Chapel. Their mother asked for you by name.
Father Surdon can hear them.
He is already taking evening prayers because your fever objected to the Marquess.
Ephraim's mention of the waiting family stripped the convenience from my lie.
I will return before dusk.
You do not know where she is going.
I watched Ottilie enter her carriage. Through the open door, the rosary cross lay over her pulse like a dark accusation.
Yes, I do.
The carriage rolled away as the first bell for prayer sounded. I followed on the horseback before the second. Chapter 3. The blood on her lower lip. Bellamont's carriage did not take the main road to the estate house. It turned through a gate half hidden by yew trees and climbed toward a narrow private chapel on the western rise. I tethered my horse beneath a stone angel whose face had weathered away. The carriage waited empty. No footman stood at the door. No lamp burned in the windows except 2 low flames near the altar. I knew it was a trap. I entered because the rosary was mine, because leaving it against her skin was intolerable, and because I had already failed a waiting family for the privilege of following her. The rest of my reasons came after I crossed the threshold. Ottilie had laid the rosary across the white altar cloth. She stood with her back to me. Her gown was pale lilac silk, open at the throat, its fitted sleeves ending in translucent cuffs. Her hair covered the front pew and much of the aisle behind it. Moonlight silvered the straight lengths until they seemed colder than the stone.
Give it back.
She turned a key in the lock. The small metal sound traveled through the chapel.
Unlock the door.
No.
She removed her left glove and closed the bare hand around the key. I crossed the distance before she could hide it, caught both her wrists, and pressed them against the carved end of the pew. Her pulse struck my palms. She did not flinch.
You came more quickly than I expected.
I left people who needed me.
And still you came.
This is not a triumph.
It is not a blessing either. We agree on something.
She freed neither hand. Instead, she lifted her chin toward the altar.
Take it.
I released one wrist long enough to reach for the rosary. She moved first. The beads slipped over my head and tightened at the back of my neck as she drew me down. Then her fingers found the ivory clerical band at my throat. I caught her hand.
Do not.
Her pale blue eyes held mine, intent and entirely unsmiling. She pulled the band free. The absence of that narrow pressure should have meant nothing. Instead, the air touched the skin beneath my jaw like an exposure. Ottilie placed the collar beside the rosary on the altar and kissed me before I completed the warning I had repeated to myself all the way from the cathedral. Her mouth was warm, human, soft in a way that made the stillness of her public face seem a deliberate lie. I held her wrists because holding anything else would have been worse. She kissed without hesitation and without the clumsy curiosity I'd expected from an unmarried woman, whose reputation depended upon looking untouched. Her body fitted against mine. The moonstone pendant at her chest pressed into my waistcoat. Her hair slid over my hand and down my sleeve, heavy as water. I turned my face away.
Unlock the door.
No.
You do not understand what you are inviting.
I understand that you followed me.
You understand nothing.
She studied my mouth. Then she bit her own lower lip. The skin broke under one white tooth. A single red bead formed, bright against the soft pink of her mouth. My grip tightened around her wrist. She leaned forward and touched it to my lips. I remember the key pressing into my palm where I crushed her hand around it. I remember the rosary tightening across the back of my neck. I remember the pew striking the wall when I drove her against it. I do not remember deciding to kiss her again. My mouth took hers hard enough that her head struck the carved wood. Her breath broke. I tasted iron, then heat, then the particular living sweetness that had already lodged itself somewhere beneath thought. My fangs descended. She made a small sound into my mouth, not fear, not yet, and pulled the rosary tighter. The torn edge of her glove caught under my thumb. Silk split at her wrist. I pinned both hands above her shoulder and bent toward her throat. Her pulse was no longer calm. It beat so violently that I could see it move beneath the porcelain skin. My mouth opened over it. The scent entered me before the bite. Her knees weakened against the pew. One of her hands closed on my hair. Her fingers tightened in my hair. I struck my own mouth with the back of my wrist and staggered away. Ottilie remained against the pew, breathing through parted lips. Blood marked her lower lip and the corner of mine. One lace cuff hung torn. Her hair had caught around a carved finial and pulled tight enough to tilt her head. For the first time, her composure looked like something she had to rebuild. I turned toward the narrow vestry window above the cabinet of old hymnals, broke the latch, climbed through, and dropped into wet winter grass with the collar still on the altar and the rosary tangled at my throat. Behind me, the chapel door remained locked. By dawn, wanting her seemed the lesser danger. Want could be starved. What terrified me was how completely blood and desire had fused once I allowed myself enough of either to remember what deprivation concealed. So I stopped feeding. The cathedral kept sheep blood in sealed jars for me, delivered through a butcher who believed it was used for medicinal poultices. I poured the next measure into the drain. I did the same at noon. By evening, light sharpened at the edges and every heartbeat in the nave sounded near enough to touch. Ephraim watched me from the sacristy table.
You are shaking.
I am cold.
You have not been cold in 12 years.
Before I could answer, men shouted at the western door. A coachman had been thrown beneath a wheel on the cathedral road. They carried him in on a stable door, his trouser leg black with blood below the knee. Bone had broken through the skin. His wife ran beside him, saying my name because I had heard her daughter's confession before the girl died of fever, and grief had made me, in her mind, trustworthy. I smelled the injury from across the nave. Ephraim stepped in front of me.
Father Serden can go.
The coachman heard him.
No, Wycliffe.
His face had gone gray.
Please, the severe one. He doesn't lie.
I could have refused. I'd already failed one family that day for Ottilie. I would not fail another because of what she had awakened. The excuse lasted until I knelt beside him. I knelt beside the man in the side chapel. Fresh blood soaked through the cloth a groom pressed to his leg. I placed my hand over the groom's and began the prayer for the dying, though the man was not yet dying and might not die if the bleeding slowed.
Through this holy anointing.
The pulse in his wrist stumbled beneath my fingers, my mouth filled with saliva.
Father?
I tightened my grip. The coachman cried out. His wrist bones shifted under my hand. I lost the next line of the prayer. Blood seeped between the groom's fingers. I leaned closer to inspect the wound and heard my own breathing change. The coachman saw my teeth. His terror was immediate, clean, and more sobering than incense or pain. I looked at Ephraim. He understood enough. The brass lamp hook struck my shoulder as he dragged me backward by the collar of my jacket. I hit the chapel wall, caught myself, and nearly turned on him before the wooden rosary at his belt knocked against my hand.
Blow.
The coachman stared at me from the floor, his face wet with sweat.
What is wrong, then?
Ephraim did not answer. He called 2 men to carry the injured coachman to the infirmary and took me by the arm with a strength his narrow frame should not have possessed. The old penitential cell lay beneath the cathedral crypt, beyond stone saints whose faces wept condensation. An iron cuff had been fixed to the wall in some harsher century and never removed. I fastened one wrist, then the other. Ephraim stood outside the cell with his keyring in hand.
How long?
Until I say otherwise.
You nearly bit a dying man.
I know.
You accepted the duty after you knew you were unsafe.
I know.
Then do not call this caution.
I pulled the chains tight and sat against the wall.
Lock it.
He did. When he offered to leave the key on the outer hook, I refused it. The iron door closed. His lamp withdrew between the tombs. In the dark, I heard the injured coachman ask someone above whether the priest was ill. Through stone, rain, prayer, and the beating of every mouse in the crypt, I heard another rhythm that was not present. Audley's heart had become loudest when absent. Chapter 4. One hand left chained. Ephraim came at dawn with water and news that the coachman would keep his leg. He could offer no promise about what the man had seen. He left at dusk with the cup untouched. On the second day, he brought a sealed jar of animal blood. I broke it against the wall rather than drink. The smell filled the cell, old and dead. It made me ill, which I took for virtue. On the third evening, another set of footsteps crossed the crypt. They were too light for Ephraim and too certain for anyone who had entered by mistake. The iron door opened. Audley stood in the threshold wearing a white wool cloak over a muted burgundy gown. The torn glove from the chapel remained on her left hand, mended badly at the wrist. A healing line marked her lower lip. Ephraim's lamp was in her bare right hand.
How did you get that key?
Your sacristan had iron dust on his sleeve.
That does not answer me.
I told him I had seen the injured coachman carried out. I said I could ask the cathedral authorities to open every locked room in daylight, before witnesses, or he could let me descend alone.
He should have refused.
He did. For 11 minutes.
She entered and set the lamp on the stone table. The black rosary lay coiled beside it. My collar did not. Ephraim appeared behind her, his face pinched with anger.
I will not come farther, and I will not conceal another consequence for either of you.
Take her back upstairs.
She has rank enough to tear the cathedral apart if she chooses.
That has never impressed you.
No, but frightened people with authority are still dangerous.
He looked at Audley.
You have until the lamp burns halfway. Then I open the door with others present.
She inclined her head as though he had announced the hour of tea. Ephraim left. The key remained in her hand. Audley crossed the cell and knelt before me.
You have not fed.
You came to verify your work.
I came because you vanished before I was finished.
Your lower lip says otherwise.
She touched the healing cut.
This?
You misjudged what would happen.
So did you.
I pulled against both cuffs.
Leave.
Instead, she unlocked my right wrist. The freed chain fell across the floor with a heavy scrape. My left hand remained fixed to the wall. She set the key on the stone table next to the rosary, beyond the length of the remaining chain.
Do you imagine this makes you safe?
No.
She removed the torn glove and laid it beside the cuff. The hand beneath it was unsteady for one moment. She curled the fingers until the shaking disappeared. Then she settled between my knees. One hand was free. The other remained chained to the wall. She sat close enough for me to touch her and left the key beyond reach. I placed my free hand against her shoulder and pushed. She caught the loose length of chain and wound it once around her wrist. When I moved her away, the iron drew her back within reach.
You arrange your helplessness very carefully.
My hand closed around the back of her neck beneath the weight of her hair.
It will not obey you.
Show me where it stops.
She pressed the healing cut on her lip to my mouth. I turned away. She followed. I gripped her nape hard enough to feel the delicate bones under skin.
Not the throat.
It was the first boundary either of us had spoken, and it sounded like a threat. She tilted her head, exposing the pale line below her pulse but above the collarbone. I chose the place myself. I chose the depth. I chose, at least at first, how much of her entered me. My teeth broke skin. Her body went rigid between my knees. The first mouthful was hotter than memory. The second carried the rhythm of her heart through my jaw. My starved body took it with a violence that made prayer impossible. Audley's bare hand caught my shoulder. The chain in her other hand drew tight. I stopped after 3 swallows, or meant to. She pulled me back. The small motion broke what remained of the arrangement. I rose with enough force to lift her from the floor. Her back struck the stone table. The lamp flame jumped. I pinned both wrists above her head with my free hand, and the strength in her arms became irrelevant. Naked fear crossed her face before she could smooth it away. My grip tightened.
Severin.
It was the first time she used my name. My mouth returned to the shallow wound, then dragged lower to her shoulder when the pulse beneath my tongue became too tempting. I tore the seam of her gown with my teeth and hand. Burgundy silk gave way. Her pale skin marked under my grip. The chain she had used to draw herself closer scraped uselessly across the floor when I turned her against the stone table. Her hair spilled over the edge and across the floor. The remaining chain ran from my left wrist to the wall, short enough that every movement pulled iron into old scars. I could have stopped. I did not. I dragged her skirts above her knees and closed the remaining distance with the same rough certainty that had frightened her. She caught herself on both hands. One glove lay discarded beside her fingers. Her breath struck the stone in broken sounds. The table shifted hard enough to scrape the wall, and the chain opened the old wound at my left wrist again. When my mouth returned to her neck, she went still. I forced it to her shoulder instead. She turned her face enough to look at me.
You knew.
The words barely carried.
Knew what?
Who I was.
No.
My hand tightened over her wrist.
I knew your heartbeat before I saw your face. The night you did not enter my booth, I listened for it.
Her composure broke more completely at that, than it had at my teeth. She closed her eyes. Her free hand reached back, found my hip, and gripped hard enough to bruise. I bit again below the first mark. The pulse under my mouth weakened. At first I mistook the change for satisfaction. Then the interval between beats lengthened. I tore myself away. Audley sagged against the table. The hand gripping me began to shake. Blood moved in two thin lines down her shoulder and disappeared beneath torn burgundy silk. I pressed my palm over the bites.
Look at me.
She did, with visible effort.
Say my name.
You dislike repetition.
Say it.
Severin.
Her voice was faint but exact. I dragged my freed cuff back around my wrist and locked it with the small secondary catch built into the iron. The key remained beyond reach. The action left both of us trapped until Ephraim returned. Audley slid to the floor beside the table. She tried to fasten the torn glove with one hand. The pearl button escaped her twice. I kept my hands on my knees. When Ephraim opened the cell, he looked at the blood on her shoulder, the torn gown, and the restored cuff. He said nothing. He looked at me once, then offered Audley his arm. Audley refused his arm. She climbed the crypt stairs with one hand on the wall and the torn glove hanging open. I waited until her heartbeat had steadied above me. Then I bent the old secondary catch until the metal split, tore my left cuff from the mortar, and left the cathedral before dawn. My horse was saddled in the rear stable. I took the north road with her blood still dried at the corner of my mouth. Her coachman told me later that the carriage had waited beyond the cemetery wall. Before I cleared the cathedral gate, Audley had ordered him to follow any rider taking the north road, keep the lamps dark, and mark every turn. By sunrise, I had reached the house where my father died. Chapter 5. The Ring Beside the Pistol. The Wycliffe hunting house had been abandoned for so long that the stable roof had fallen inward, and young ash trees grew through the kitchen floor. The main room remained as my mother had left it. Every ancestral portrait faced the wall. A chair stood beneath the north window, its leather seat split with age. On the boards below it, a brown-black mark spread wider than two hands. Winter had faded the curtains and silvered the dust. It had not faded that stain. I opened the pistol box on the table. My father's weapon lay inside, oiled before his death and never touched afterward. Beside it rested a silver wedding ring threaded on a broken chain. Unused. That detail had confused me as a boy. Gideon Wycliffe had married my mother. He wore her devotion openly enough to make it embarrassing. Yet the ring in the box had never been placed on her hand. It belonged to the older rite of our family, the one attached to the cure, the one he had refused to complete. I loaded the pistol. The powder measured neatly, the ball seated beneath the ramrod. My hands did not shake. I had practiced the act in thought until it possessed the calm of liturgy. I sat beneath the blood mark. The house gave small winter sounds around me. A branch scratched the window. Water moved inside a frozen pipe and stopped. My horse shifted in the ruined stable. I lifted the pistol. My sleeve caught the ring. Silver clicked against wood. For one moment I was 17 again, barefoot in the doorway, while my mother knelt beneath the chair with a brush and a basin gone pink. Rosamond Wycliffe had worn a dove-blue dress that morning. One cuff was dark to the elbow. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its braided coil, and silver already showed at her temples, though she was not yet 40. A priest stood behind her and said, my father had chosen mercy. My mother stopped scrubbing.
No.
Only that. Then she put the brush back into the blood and continued until the skin split across her knuckles. I lowered the pistol to my knee. That hesitation gave Audley time to arrive. The front door opened hard enough to strike the wall. Wind threw dead leaves across the floor. She entered without cloak or hat, her ivory shoes wet with mud, the torn glove still on her left hand. A tracking coachman remained outside beside a dark carriage, bent over from the cold. Audley saw the pistol before she saw the stain. She crossed the room and struck my wrist with both hands. The shot did not fire. The weapon skidded under the table. I caught her by the throat and drove her against the wall. Her wound had reopened beneath the torn glove she held against it. I smelled my own bite before I felt the quickness of her pulse.
You followed me.
Yes.
You sent a servant after me.
Yes.
You think this is another locked chapel.
Her gaze moved past my shoulder to the chair and the old mark beneath it. For the first time since I had known her, she did not answer at once. Her gaze stayed on the stain beneath the chair. When she looked back at me, calculation had replaced the challenge in her face. I released her. She bent, one hand on the table, and breathed carefully until the color returned to her face.
You are weak.
You fed from me.
Not enough to do this.
Then perhaps your horse rides faster than my carriage.
I retrieved the pistol.
Leave.
No.
There is nothing left for you to discover.
You came here to die. That seems new.
I turned the weapon in my hand.
You wanted the truth.
I still do.
You will not like its use.
I rarely choose things because they are pleasant.
So I told her the part that could no longer remain hidden.
The curse does not leave a man because he abstains. It does not leave because he prays, starves, or refuses the woman it chooses for him.
Her eyes dropped to the dark ring around my pupils.
It leaves after marriage, after a child.
The quiet in the house became exact.
What kind of child?
A living one. Mine, born of my wife. It must draw breath.
And then?
The pistol felt heavier.
Then I drink from her.
You have already done that.
Not deeply enough. Not after the child lives.
She looked at the blood mark again.
How deeply? I can infer.
No.
Does the wife survive?
Sometimes, the old accounts claim.
You do not believe them.
The men wrote the accounts.
Her damaged glove tightened over the edge of the table.
And the child?
A daughter may be free. A son may carry it.
I had not said those words aloud since my mother whispered them over my father's body. She survived him long enough to raise me and died before I took the cathedral post, still refusing to call what he had done mercy. The curse moved through inherited fragments, never a clean history. In old miniatures and my childhood nightmares, Morwenna Ainsworth stood in pale lilac silk, her copper hair bright against a burned bridal veil. Edric Wycliffe laid down a ducal signet to take the scarred hand of Cecily Rooke, a commoner with chestnut curls and flower on her sleeve. Cecily hid blood at her throat while Morwenna's joined rings flashed across one still hand. Every man who calls abandonment love will choose which beloved carries the wound. That was the sentence handed down in our family. Perhaps Morwenna had spoken it. Perhaps frightened descendants had polished it into something memorable. The curse itself was less elegant. A man loved, a woman bled, A child inherited the cost, or a wife survived the man who chose not to risk her.
My father reached the threshold. He had a wife. He had a living son.
You.
Yes.
He did not drink from your mother.
He chose the pistol.
Audley's gaze went to the ring beside the box.
He left her alive.
He saved her.
From his teeth.
Yes.
Who saved her from the floor?
I said nothing.
Who lifted the chair? Who washed his blood from the boards? Who told his son why his father preferred a weapon to raising him?
He believed.
Your mother was still alive when he called it mercy, wasn't she?
The word struck harder than her hand had. I looked at the stain. I looked at the pistol in my hand and the raw cuff marks around my wrists. Audley took the wedding ring from the table.
Do not.
She drew off her right glove and slid the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large. She closed her hand so it would not fall.
You are not my wife.
No, that remains inconvenient.
Take it off.
No.
I recovered the pistol and placed it inside my coat. Her mouth lost color. She swayed. Instinct moved me before judgment. I caught her around the waist. Her hair swept across my boots, and for one moment her forehead rested against my chest. The torn glove remained on her left hand. Her torn glove hid the movement inside my coat. By the time I understood, she had stepped away.
You will return to the carriage. You will have a physician tend the wound. Then you will forget this house.
That is a great many orders from a man who has obeyed none of mine willingly.
She walked to the door. When the carriage began moving, she lifted the pistol into the window, silver against her pale glove. The unused ring shone on her other hand. I ran after the carriage because she had taken the only ending I had prepared. Chapter 6. The Vow She Took at Gunpoint. The carriage led me 6 miles east to a ruined chapel that had once served travelers on the old river road. A storm broke as I reached it. Rain came through the cracked roof and struck the flagstones in silver lines. One red candle burned on the altar. The marriage register lay open beneath my black rosary. Ephraim stood beside the door with his short cape darkened by rain. Audley waited at the altar in an ivory gown. The narrow silver comb shaped like foxglove bells held one section of her hair. The rest fell over her shoulder and trailed across the wet floor. My father's pistol rested beneath her chin. The ring remained on her bare right hand.
Put it down.
Say the vow.
Ephraim moved toward the door.
I will not witness an armed marriage.
Audley cocked the pistol. The mechanism snapped through the chapel. Ephraim stopped.
Lady Bellamont, that weapon is old, wet, and poorly suited to threats. It may kill you before you decide whether you meant it.
That will still solve Father Severin's difficulty.
Nothing about this solves anything.
No, it makes one future unavailable.
I advanced. She pressed the barrel harder into the soft place under her jaw.
Stay where you are.
You will not fire.
Her eyes did not leave mine. I remembered the dismissed footman, the locked chapel, the key beyond my reach, and the carriage following without lamps. Audley never made a threat before arranging its consequence.
Were the stories true?
Ephraim looked sharply at me. Audley's pulse accelerated. Not guilt, not confession, a body remembering danger.
Which stories?
Your father, your brother.
Rain struck the register. A red drop of wax slid down the candle.
My father owed more than the estate could pay.
He arranged my marriage to the creditor who held the largest portion. I refused. He ordered my maid to put laudanum in my tea so I could be conveyed without a scene.
Her voice remained soft.
I placed foxglove in his cordial that night. I watched until his hand could no longer reach the bell.
Ephraim's fingers tightened on his keyring.
And your brother?
He discovered what I had done. He signed papers declaring me unfit to govern myself and ordered the west rooms prepared for my confinement. He intended to complete the marriage after my father's burial.
The pistol did not move.
I used the same cordial.
And watched him die.
Yes.
She spoke without pride or apology. Her hand remained steady beneath the pistol. The barrel stayed under her jaw. If I refused, she meant to fire before I could leave.
You would do it.
You already know that.
Ephraim's face had gone gray beneath his sunspots.
If you both speak the full vows, and I enter them in that register, the marriage will bind, whether I bless it or not.
I know.
Then hear me refuse the blessing.
I did not ask you for one.
You asked me to witness.
I asked you to hear him say it.
He looked at me.
And what did you ask of him?
He refused me.
Ephraim's keyring struck once against his palm. I was faster, but the pistol was already set. Walking away would leave Ephraim to decide whether to seize a woman who had killed twice before allowing men to confine her. I stepped to the altar.
Lower the weapon.
After.
I spoke the vow. I used her full name, Ottilie Bellamont. I promised fidelity, protection, and the keeping of a common household. The barrel had left a red circle beneath her jaw. I watched it while I spoke. When it was her turn, she spoke without hesitation. Ephraim watched with his lined mouth pressed flat. The final response belonged to me.
I take you as my wife.
Ottilie lowered the pistol. I took it from her hand, uncocked it, and placed it beneath the altar myself. Then I pushed my father's unused ring fully down her finger until it sat at the base. She looked at my hand over hers. I took the black rosary from the register. For 12 years, I had used those beads to divide myself from appetite, from family, from every life I might endanger by entering it. I laid the crucifix across the open page and signed beneath it. Severin Wycliffe, not the shortened name under which I had served, not the anonymous priest who belonged nowhere beyond the confessional. The ducal name I had abandoned went into the register beside hers. Ephraim signed as witness.
I will not bless you.
Ottilie closed the register.
You have said so?
I am saying it to him.
Ephraim looked at me.
You will remain alive until morning. Say it.
Ottilie's gaze sharpened.
I will remain alive until morning.
Ephraim took the register beneath his cape. At the door he paused, keyring in hand.
If I leave, I abandon 2 people with a loaded pistol. If I stay, I put my name beneath this.
He tucked the register under his cape.
I will keep the page. I will not lie about how it was signed.
Then he walked into the rain. The chapel became quiet except for water falling through the roof. Ottilie stood before me with the wedding ring on her bare hand and gun oil marking the side of one finger. I found a basin near the ruined sacristy. Rain had filled it. I took her hand and washed the oil away. She watched me with the strange stillness she used when another person's action had escaped her design. Her hand remained warm in mine. When my thumb touched the ring, she closed her fingers over it. I released her. The marriage was complete. I could have left. Audley crossed the chapel and barred the door. My body responded before I turned. She removed the final narrow collar band still tucked beneath my shirt. The main piece had remained on her private altar. This last strip was only habit, a remnant of office I had continued to wear because no one could see it. She placed it beside the red candle. Then she opened my shirt.
Do not mistake the vow for permission.
I do not.
Her bare hand slid beneath the linen and pressed flat over my chest.
Then refuse me.
She loosened the ivory bodice herself and guided my hand under it. Her skin was warm from the chapel despite the rain. The healing marks at the base of her throat and shoulder roughened under my thumb. She kissed me. I answered. Audley pushed me down onto the altar steps and settled over me, the full skirt of her gown spreading across wet stone. She took the upper position as though all intimacy were another room whose arrangement she would control before anyone else entered. I gripped her hips. She moved against me until my grip tightened hard enough to bruise. When our bodies joined, her breath caught against my mouth and her hands closed at my shoulders. Then the cure entered my mind. Wife, child, blood. I stopped. Audley tried to move again. I held her still.
What?
You know what?
You told me conception was required.
I told you it could kill you.
You told me a pistol was safer.
It is.
For you.
She tried to pull me back into motion. I refused.
Listen to me.
I am listening.
No, you are arranging.
That struck. Her eyes narrowed.
If a child begins tonight, this is no longer a threat you can carry in your glove. It will live inside you. My hunger will change. I may hurt you before the birth. I may kill you after it.
You may.
And if you die, I will not remain.
Her body went completely still. The rain sounded louder. She took both my wrists and pinned them to the stone above my shoulders. I let her hold them there. Hold.
You will not follow me.
Do not ask me that.
I'm not asking.
I will not promise you a life built on your death.
You planned one built on mine. You simply intended to leave first.
I looked away. She tightened her hands.
Say it.
No.
She released me. Audley rose from my body, gathered her loosened dress around herself, and sat one step above me. Her hands rested open on her knees. The door remained barred, but the aisle to it was clear, and she made no attempt to touch me again. I could leave the chapel. The vow and marriage would remain, but no child might begin. I stayed on the step.
You will not follow me.
I looked at the ring on her hand.
I will remain alive if you die.
Her throat moved once. Her hands stayed open on her knees. I reached for her. I turned her beneath me on the altar steps. Ivory silk tore at the waist under my hand. Red wax had spilled from the candle and cooled against the edge of her ring. Rainwater ran from my open shirt onto her skin. I drew her back beneath me. I kept my mouth at her shoulder rather than her throat. She wrapped both arms around me and held on with a fierceness that had nothing graceful in it. The stone bruised her back. My old restraint marks burned where she gripped my wrists. The red candle burned lower. Neither of us stopped. When it was done, neither of us spoke. Her ivory dress lay split across the altar step. My father's pistol remained beneath the altar where I had put it. The red candle had burned low. The black rosary was gone with the signed register and the witness who would not call our marriage holy. Chapter 7. The Second Heartbeat. The first thing I did as Audely's husband was change the bandage on the wound I had made. She sat before the mirror in her bedchamber while I cut away linen stuck to her shoulder. Black sheets covered the bed behind us. Frost made white ferns across the tall windows. Her hair had been lifted over one arm of the chair and still reached the carpet, a dense platinum curtain that took 2 maids an hour to comb when she permitted them near it. She had dismissed the maids before I entered.
You are pulling.
The cloth has dried into the bite.
You are still pulling.
I could ask someone gentler.
No.
I soaked the linen until it loosened. The punctures were clean, but the bruising around them had gone yellow at the edges. I spread salve over the skin with 2 fingers, wrapped fresh cloth around her shoulder, and tied it where the knot would not press when she slept. Audely watched my hands in the mirror.
You would rather no one else touched it.
Another person would ask what caused it.
So it is secrecy.
Yes.
She smiled at my reflection.
Liar.
The wound closed slowly. I tended it every evening, always with some practical excuse ready. Infection. Bleeding. The need to track the curse. When the skin finally sealed into a pale crescent low on the right side of her throat, just above the collarbone, I brought no bandage. Audely removed her gown from one shoulder and took my hand.
There is nothing to treat.
I know.
She pressed my fingers to the scar. Without the work of cleaning and wrapping, the touch had no innocent purpose. My thumb moved over the raised line. Her pulse beat above it. Her fingers left mine when my thumb moved over the scar again. That became our first ritual. The second took place at the dining table. I prepared her meals whenever I could, not because Bellamont lacked cooks, but because feeding another person was easier than speaking to one. I learned she disliked pears baked soft, would eat leeks only if they were cut very thin, and left the final mouthful on her plate when frightened. She learned I could remain at the table if my animal blood was measured into a porcelain cup, and the kitchen kept all fresh carving out of sight. For a time, the arrangement resembled control. Then the kitchen butchered a winter stag. The smell reached the dining room through 2 doors and a service passage. It was not human blood. It should have been manageable. Instead, my stomach tightened, my vision sharpened, and the cup broke in my hand. Dark animal blood spread over the white tablecloth. A maid entered at the sound. Her finger had been nicked while paring onions. The small human scent struck through everything else. I was across the room before I understood I had risen. Audely stepped between us. She stepped into my path, too slight to stop me and impossible to mistake for the maid.
Go.
She told the maid. The girl fled. I backed away from Audely until the wall stopped me. A shard of porcelain had cut my palm. Blood ran between my fingers. Mine and the stag's mixed together.
Do not come closer.
She looked at the wrecked table.
You drank the proper measure.
It did not hold.
Then we increase it.
No.
Because you dislike it?
Because it is failing.
I locked myself in the east chamber before hunger could decide which pulse in the house mattered most. The room had been stripped of sharp metal. I'd done that on my second day at the estate. It had 1 bed, 1 chair, a washstand, and an iron ring bolted to the floor beneath the boards. I fastened a short chain to my right wrist and sat against the wall. Audely tried the door once.
Open it.
I'm keeping you out.
I know.
She did not argue again. An hour later, the hinges lifted from their pins. The door fell inward. Audely stood on the other side, holding the top pin in one gloved hand and the bottom pin in the other. Her face remained serene. The pulse in her throat did not.
You cannot remove every door in the estate.
I can remove every one you lock against me.
This is not the chapel.
No, this is my house.
Your servants bleed.
So do I.
That is precisely the danger.
She entered and saw the blood on the floor, where the chain had opened the old restraint mark around my wrist. Her expression changed.
You call this safety?
It keeps me from the corridor.
It opens your wrist while the rest of us wait outside.
I turned my face away. She placed the hinge pins on the washstand and sat on the floor beyond the reach of my chain. We stayed that way until the scent from the kitchens faded. She sat beyond the chain with both hands folded in her lap. The empty space between us sharpened every pulse in the room. The third ritual began without agreement. Audley slept poorly after the ruined chapel. I knew because her pulse changed whenever my hand left her wrist. The first night I woke with my fingers around it, she was already awake and watching me. I moved away. She caught my hand and put it back. After that, she did so without opening her eyes. Counted sleep, I called it privately. Her heart beneath 2 fingers, my other hand on the mattress. 100 beats, then another 100, until hunger and vigilance became indistinguishable from rest. The night after the broken cup, I returned to the shared bed only to prove she was unharmed. Her platinum hair covered half the black linen. She lay on her side with one hand under her cheek, and the wedding ring turned inward against her palm. I placed 2 fingers around her wrist. One rhythm answered, then another, softer, faster, buried beneath the first. My hand tightened. Audley woke.
What is it?
I listened again. The second heartbeat was impossibly small and perfectly alive. I snatched my hand from her wrist. She sat up, gathering the sheet over herself.
Severin.
I backed out of the room. The east chamber had no door. Audley had left it leaning against the corridor wall after removing the hinges. I crossed the threshold, fastened the short chain to my wrist, and dragged the washstand across the opening. By dawn, the basin on it was streaked with animal blood I had failed to keep down. Audley stopped in the corridor beyond the chain's reach. For the first time, she did not move the barrier. The child's rhythm had changed the scent of her body. I could hear it beneath her voice.
You are with child.
Her stillness was complete. For once, she had not known before I did. Her hand moved to her abdomen. It was too early for any visible change.
How certain?
There are 2.
She looked at the blood in the basin, then at the chain around my wrist.
Take that off.
No.
We knew this might happen.
We have done nothing.
Then tell me what is.
Distance.
You tried distance. It ended with a coachman beneath your mouth.
Before noon, Audley sent for Avis Fane. Avis arrived from the southern villages with mud to her ankles and a medical satchel that had been repaired at least 6 times. She had served difficult births across the Bellamont villages for 20 years. She was broad through the shoulders and hips, with dark auburn hair braided tightly around her crown, and hazel green eyes that did not change when Audley explained that her husband's condition worsened around pregnancy.
How much worse?
I can hear the child.
That was not the question.
Audley's mouth nearly moved. I told Avis about the cup, the maid, and the blood in the basin, but kept the cure to myself. She examined Audley, counted her pulse with a sand timer, pressed careful fingers to her abdomen, and ordered more food, more rest, less stair climbing, and no blood loss under any circumstance.
That may not be possible.
Avis looked at the scar low on the right side of her throat.
It requires obedience.
Ephraim came from the cathedral 2 days later, carrying iron keys, the black rosary wrapped around one fist, and disapproval. That night, with Avis's satchel open between us, I told her the part I had withheld. Wife, child, blood, and the possibility that the cure would turn childbirth into a killing. She moved the lamp closer and asked where the chains would be fixed. Together we built a plan that assumed all of us wished Audley to survive. Measured animal blood at fixed hours. No servants in the room while I drank. Avis to visit every fortnight, then weekly as the child grew. The estate chapel prepared with chains only for the hours after the birth, when the cure could awaken fully. A birthing chamber stocked nearby. The pistol Ephraim had retrieved from beneath the ruined altar locked behind glass, its key in Audley's keeping. For several weeks, no cup broke and no servant fled. Life began acquiring habits before I trusted it. I combed the lower half of Audley's hair at night while she read household accounts and pretended not to tire. We concealed the pregnancy beneath layered gowns until no tailoring could hide it. I prepared her breakfast. On frightened mornings, she left the final mouthful untouched. At the carpenter's, I checked the cradle grain twice. By the time her body rounded beneath her gowns, I'd begun wearing gloves indoors to dull the heat of her skin. She removed them in the bath chamber. Steam softened the lamps. I sat in the deep copper tub after a long ride, my hair wet and fallen forward, when Audley entered wearing a silver blue robe.
You dismissed the attendant.
Yes.
You should not be on the wet floor alone.
I am not alone.
She sat on the edge of the tub and drew off my right glove one finger at a time, then the left. Old cuff marks circled both wrists. She touched them before placing my hands over the rise of her abdomen. The child moved faintly beneath my palms. I stopped breathing. Audley opened her robe and stepped into the water. Her hair followed, floating over the surface in pale ribbons before spilling over the tub edge. She settled astride me, warmer than the water. The wedding ring cool against the back of my neck.
You are meant to rest.
I am.
This is not rest.
It is for me.
She kissed me. She had spent the afternoon silent after the child moved beneath her dress. Now she pressed my hand over the same place before I could ask what frightened her. She drew me closer and set the pace herself, slow at first, then with increasing insistence. Water moved over the rim onto the floor. My hands stayed on her hips until she took one and placed it back on her abdomen. The child kicked hard beneath my palm. We both stopped. Audley lowered her face to my shoulder and held my wrist over the place the child had kicked. Her pulse raced beneath my jaw. She drew my wrist down and tried to resume the same rhythm. I held still.
Do not stop.
I held her still.
Severin.
Her eyes met mine. I supported her weight with one arm and waited. When her hand tightened at my shoulder, I moved again. My mouth stayed at her shoulder. I watched her face instead of the pulse in her throat. Afterward, the water had gone cold. Her hair hung over the side of the tub and pooled on the tiles. My gloves lay soaked beside the basin. Audley rested her forehead against mine. Neither of us spoke about the future. That night I left the east chamber open and returned to our bed. I woke before dawn with one hand around her wrist and the other spread over the child. When I began to count, 2 rhythms answered me. Chapter 8. The Lie Beneath Her Pulse. The animal blood began coming back up when the first snow returned, early in the 8th month. At first it happened only after the evening measure, then after noon. Soon I could not keep down enough to dull the sound of the house. The servants' hearts traveled through floors. Avis's pulse entered a room before she did. Audely's filled every corridor, accompanied by the quick, bright rhythm beneath it. I began losing pieces of the night. Once I woke standing beside the nursery cradle we had not yet used, my hands locked around the rail. Once I woke on the floor outside Audely's bedchamber with the door open behind me. The third time, my teeth were pressed against the fabric over her abdomen. She was awake. Both hands held my face away from the child. Her breath came hard and silent. I threw myself backward so hard the bedpost cracked. By morning, Avis had moved the planned restraints from the chapel to the treatment chamber.
You cannot starve until the birth.
Not if starvation carries you into her room without memory.
I will chain both hands.
You did that beneath the cathedral. Did it make you safe?
I looked at Ephraim. He said nothing. Avis set the sand timer on the table.
A small feeding while she is strong may keep you conscious enough to obey the chains during labor. It may also fail. Those are the choices left.
Audely sat in a high-backed chair beside the prepared bath. Her gown was pale gray, loose over the full curve of her pregnancy. One white glove covered the hand she had offered.
No.
She began undoing the pearl buttons.
Leave them fastened.
You have objected.
Now choose between this room and waking with your mouth on the child again.
I placed my right wrist in the iron cuff fixed to the wall. Ephraim locked it and kept the key. My left hand remained free only so I could brace myself if I weakened. Avis positioned Audely within reach and opened the sand timer.
We stop before the lower chamber empties. Lady Bellamont, if you feel faint, speak. Do not prove anything.
Audely removed her glove. The skin of her inner wrist was nearly translucent. She held it toward me with the ring turned away. I could hear the child beneath her pulse.
I will bite shallowly.
I know.
You do not.
No, but begin.
I placed my mouth against her wrist. The first taste steadied me. The second did not. The child's heartbeat answered the feeding. One small rhythm quickened beneath the larger, and the curse recognized continuation. Hunger drove through Audely toward the child, toward the entire living chain between us.
Enough.
I did not release her. Audely's fingers closed in my hair.
Severin.
I bit deeper. The sand ran out. Ephraim pulled the chain. Avis struck my jaw with the brass handle of her scissors. Audely ordered me to stop, then said my name again when command failed. Their voices blurred beneath the pulse in my mouth. The child moved violently beneath her gown. Audely's pulse collapsed. Her pulse dropped beneath my tongue. I tore my mouth away so abruptly skin ripped beneath my teeth. She fell before she could cover the wound. I caught her with my free arm. Blood poured over the cut cuff of her sleeve and into the bathwater, blooming pale red through steam.
Avis.
The midwife was already moving.
Lay her flat. Ephraim, cloth. More light. Now.
Audely tried to say something about the servants. I shouted for them. The whole household heard me. Doors opened. Feet ran. Avis cut the white glove from Audely's wrist to reach the pulse. The pearl buttons scattered across the tiles. She packed the bite, bound the arm above it, lifted Audely's feet, and sent for hot bricks, broth, clean linen, and the physician. I knelt on the floor with blood over my mouth and one wrist still chained. Audely's eyes opened. Then came her first clear words.
You made a seam.
I laughed once, without humor.
The whole house hurt me.
Avis looked up from the bandage.
Save it. I need her still.
Audely survived the night. The child survived with her. By sunrise, 2 maids had asked to leave, and a third would not cross the treatment room threshold unless Avis called her by name. Audely paid the first 2 through the quarter and ordered everyone else out of the corridor unless summoned. The corridor emptied. Audely remained pale against the pillows.
Severe loss.
Avis told us the next morning.
The wound tightened under the shock. It has quieted for now. If it begins again, the child may come too early, and she has little blood to spare.
Then it will not begin again.
Avis's stare could have scraped paint.
Your body is not on your staff.
For 3 days, Audely stayed in bed. On the 4th, she claimed the weakness had gone. Her heartbeat altered when she said it, but pulse was not confession. Fear, pain, effort, concealment, each could quicken the same artery. The curse gave me sound, not certainty, so I watched. She braced one hand against furniture when she thought I looked elsewhere. She stopped halfway up the west stairs and pretended to admire a portrait. She left the final mouthful on her plate at every meal. When Avis asked about cramping, Audely answered by discussing the wet nurse's rooms. I confronted her in the pistol gallery. Gideon's weapon sat behind glass. The cabinet key was no longer on its hook.
Where is it?
What?
The key.
Somewhere you cannot reach without waking me.
You moved it after the feeding.
Yes.
Because you think I will use the pistol if labor begins.
I think you reach for weapons when you are frightened.
Her face remained calm. One hand pressed the underside of her abdomen.
You are still having pains.
They pass.
How often?
They pass.
You stop on the stairs, leave food untouched, and lie to Avis.
And you chose his pistol room for the question.
Do you expect to survive?
She looked at the glass case instead of me. Her pulse quickened while her face stayed turned toward the glass. My hand closed around the cabinet frame.
Answer me. No, you do not expect...
No, I will not answer that question while you are standing beside his pistol.
She turned toward the door, stopped, and held the frame until a tightening passed through her body. When she could speak again.
The child's room is too cold on the north side. Choose another before supper.
She would not let me leave the gallery until I answered. I chose the room beside ours. Then we changed the birth plan. The birthing bed was moved into the antechamber directly beside the estate chapel. The interior doorway between the rooms was widened enough for Avis to pass quickly. Clean linen, warmed animal blood, medicines, broth, a small cradle, and the wet nurse's supplies were arranged before labor began. Ephraim tested the communion rail chains twice. Both my wrists would be secured when the first true pains started. He alone would hold the key. Avis stood between Audely and me in the prepared antechamber.
I will try to save her. I will try to save the child. I will not carry her into that chapel.
Attili's gaze did not waver.
If I must choose, I will save the child before I help either of you finish a curse.
No one answered. That evening, the physician's carriage was delayed by the storm. Snow became sleet, then hard rain. The river rose against the old bridge until its bell sounded once in the dark. A deep iron note. Then wood broke. The bridge went down with the second store of medicine and the physician still on the far bank. Audley's labor had begun before the bridge fell, set in motion by the feeding. From the chained side of the communion rail, I heard the first contraction stop her breath in the adjoining room. Chapter 9. The Last Communion. The first heavy scent of blood reached me before Audley cried out.
Both wrists.
He stood beside the communion rail with the chain key in one hand and his wooden rosary in the other. Rain hammered the stained glass. The red and blue panes made the chapel look submerged.
Severin. One hand was enough in the crypt.
Both.
If I lock both, I will not open them, because you hear her call.
I know.
He locked the second cuff. The iron held my arms apart against the rail. I tested each length once and then made myself stop. The links were sound. The bolts had been driven through oak into stone.
Keep the key.
That was the arrangement.
If I order you to release me.
I know.
No. Say it.
His clouded eyes rested on my face.
I will not free you because you command it.
The next contraction took Audley's breath through the open doorway. Avis's voice followed, low and practical.
Do not fight the whole pain. Let this one finish, then the next.
Audley answered with something too quiet for a human ear. I heard it.
I am not fighting.
Hours passed through pulse and sound. The storm faded toward dawn. Lamps burned down. Water boiled and cooled. Cloth moved from one basin to another. Audley's heartbeat climbed, steadied, faltered, recovered. The child's quick rhythm pressed beneath it like a fist against a door. I prayed until prayer became only names. Audley, the child, Ephraim, Avis, my mother. My own name never entered the prayer. Once Audley called my name, I pulled against the cuffs before I could prevent it. Avis appeared in the interior doorway, sleeves rolled to her elbows, apron dark with water and blood.
She is alive.
I heard her.
Then stop pulling at the cuffs.
She went back. Ephraim sat on a low stool beyond my reach. His key ring rested between both hands. He had not slept. Guilt made him look older than the cathedral had.
You can still open the outer door.
And do what?
Bring her away from me after the birth.
The bridge is gone.
The wet nurse's cottage is on this side.
And you?
I remain here.
Until when?
I watched the keys turn between his hands. Ephraim closed his hand around the keys.
And after?
What?
When you are dead, who takes the child?
A cry cut through the antechamber, not Audley's. Small, furious, alive. The sound struck every part of me at once. The child drew breath. The cure window opened. Hunger rose so violently that the chain bolts groaned under my first pull.
Is the child alive?
Yes.
Keep it away from me.
He stood.
Avis heard you.
The newborn cried again. Audley's heartbeat did not recover with the sound. Blood spread through the adjoining room in waves of scent, each hotter than the last. Avis gave orders. More cloth, pressure, the bitter draft. Lift her legs, hold here, not there. Again. The cuffs held me at the rail while Avis worked in the next room. I heard the first packing saturate. I heard the second. Avis's palm pressed hard over the womb. Audley made a hoarse sound and told her not to stop. The midwife replaced cloth again. Someone prayed. It was the wet nurse, not Ephraim. Then the final clean linen darkened as quickly as the first. Avis's hands stopped for one beat, and her eyes moved toward the cradle. Audely's pulse changed. She had seen Avis turn toward the child. I pulled against both cuffs.
Ephraim,
No.
release me.
No.
She is dying.
I know.
I need to go to her.
You need her blood.
I need...
The child cried in the next room while Audely's pulse thinned beneath it. I could not finish. Audely spoke in the other room.
Bring me to him.
Avis answered at once.
No.
Ephraim,
He stood in the doorway.
No.
you carried the register.
I was wrong.
Then get out of my way.
His eyes dropped to the blood beneath her.
I do not know whether you will survive the walk.
Her heart stumbled. The newborn gave a thin, exhausted cry. Before hunger rose, I pictured the child carried away by cleaner hands and my body left beside Audely's. I heard my mother's brush moving through my father's blood. I saw the empty chair. My hands stopped straining against the cuffs.
Give me one hand.
Ephraim turned from the doorway.
I did this once already.
Then hear me choose it.
For what?
To hold the child if she dies.
His face tightened.
Repeat the promise.
Audely had forced it from me beneath a ruined roof. Ephraim would not accept it as hers.
I will remain alive.
After morning.
After morning.
After she is gone.
Audely's heart stumbled before I could repeat them.
After she is gone.
He unlocked my right wrist. The release chain fell against the floor. My left arm remained fixed to the communion rail, one hand free. Avis stood over Audely with both palms bloodied.
Do not move. I may not be able to stop this, but I will not help you worsen it.
Utterly ignored her, she reached into the small cradle and lifted the newborn herself. The child was wrapped in plain ivory linen, face nearly hidden, fine silver blonde hair damp against a pale crown. Audely held the bundle close to her chest and stood. Her knees failed once. She caught the bedpost. Avis reached for her.
You will fall.
Then walk beside me.
No.
Audely took one step toward the interior doorway, then another. The widened doorway left only 2 steps between the bed and the chapel. She crossed both. She crossed the threshold with blood running down both legs beneath the birthing shift. The wedding ring remained on her right hand. Her hair had been braided loosely for labor, but most of it had come free and dragged behind her across the stained floor.
Stay back.
She placed the child into my free arm. The bundle weighed almost nothing. My arm shook harder beneath it than it ever had while holding a dying man. The newborn curled inward against my chest. Tiny fingers flexed at the linen. The living heartbeat struck through my forearm. I nearly dropped the child from terror. Avis followed Audely and caught the bundle from beneath, supporting the head and shoulders against my arm.
Give the child back.
Audely let one fold of linen slip. Avis moved both hands to secure it. In that instant, Audely raised her wedding ring to the old bite scar low on the right side of her throat, just above the collarbone. The silver edge cut through healed skin.
No.
Blood welled beneath the ring. She pressed the wound to my mouth. I turned my head so hard my cheeks struck the communion rail.
Take the child.
I have the child.
Take it away.
If I let go now, the head falls.
Ephraim held the second key but did not move. Audely caught my jaw with one blood-slick hand.
Look at the child.
I can't.
You will.
I looked. The newborn's eyes were closed. The mouth opened in a small, reflexive search, harmless and ordinary. It knew only warmth, weight, and the unsteady support of my arm. Ottilie pressed closer.
You promised.
Those were her last clear words. Her blood touched my tongue. The curse took what remained. I dragged her against the communion rail. My fangs entered the wound she had opened, deeper than the crypt, deeper than any controlled feeding. Blood came hot and fast. Her body struck the wood between my chained arm and the child I held. I tried to stop after the first swallow. My mouth would not release, would not.
Avis.
The name broke against her throat. The midwife wedged folded linen around my mouth and pulled at Ottilie's shoulders. The wound tore wider. Ottilie made no sound. Avis stopped pulling and pressed the cloth hard around the bite instead.
Release her.
I could not. The newborn cried against my chest. I curved my free arm around the small body, bracing the head with my wrist, while every other part of me strained toward Ottilie. Ephraim seized the back of my jacket and pulled. The remaining chain held my left side to the rail. The angle should have broken my teeth from her skin. It did not. Blood saturated Avis's packing. She replaced it once, then again.
Her pulse is nearly gone.
I heard it. Ottilie's hand rose to the back of my neck, finding the same place she had claimed in the chapel, the crypt, and the bath. Now her fingers barely closed in my hair. I tried to pull away for her sake. She kept me there with the last strength in her body. One heartbeat, a long interval, another. The child's pulse fluttered against my arm. Ottilie stopped. At that exact instant, my jaw unclenched. Her blood remained warm in my mouth, but my body no longer reached for more. I released her. Ottilie folded against the communion rail. Her hand slipped from my neck. The ring struck the wood with a small silver sound. I called her name. Avis took the child fully into her hands. I tried to follow Ottilie down, then tried to tear my remaining wrist free, then tried to reach anything that might end the space between her stopped heart and mine. The chain held. Ephraim did not unlock it. He knelt beside Ottilie and placed 2 fingers at her throat. Avis pressed fresh cloth to the wound once more, then let her hands become still. Dawn entered through the stained glass and laid red light across Ottilie's pale face. I remained alive while the newborn cried in Avis's arms. Only after Ottilie's skin had begun to cool did Ephraim put the key into the cuff. He freed me without blessing, prayer, or absolution. I gathered my wife from the floor. Her hair wrapped around my knees and the base of the communion rail. The wedding ring was wet with the blood it had released. Avis stood beside me holding the child. Her voice was tired and flat.
Hassan.
Chapter 10. The Cradle Made from Chains. Ottilie was buried beneath the cathedral's red window. The Bellamont family crypt stood empty in a hill 2 days from any village. I would not put her there. She had spent her life refusing confinement, and I would not give stone and title the final claim. At dawn, the red glass cast its color over the grave. The mason brought me the proposed inscription on a slate. Ottilie Bellamont Wycliffe, Marquess of Bellamont, mercifully delivered in childbirth. I took the chalk and struck through mercifully until the word disappeared beneath white dust. Her name remained. Her title. The years she had lived. Beneath the cathedral altar, I placed my father's pistol, the last strip of my clerical collar, and one of Ottilie's white gloves. The glove had been found in the treatment chamber with its wrist cut open by Avis's scissors. One pearl button still clung to it. The wedding ring stayed with Audilie. After the burial, Ephraim returned the black rosary to me. In the first weeks after the cure, ordinary life arrived through humiliating details. Bread gave me salt, yeast, and the faint bitterness of a scorched crust. Sunlight still hurt my eyes, but it no longer drove needles beneath my skin. When Avis cut her finger opening a medicine vial, I smelled blood and nothing in my body moved toward it. I remained stronger than most men. The garnet ring around my pupils faded, but did not vanish. My fangs receded enough to stop cutting my mouth. I did not know whether I would age normally or whether the curse had left other remnants behind. I never returned to the confessional. Ephraim gave me 2 rooms in the disused cathedral infirmary. His quarters were 1 corridor away. Avis could reach the south door without crossing the nave, and the rooms had a single entrance I could guard without shutting August away from help. Bellamont was too large and too isolated for that. The infirmary smelled of old soap, lime wash, and damp wool. 1 room faced the burial ground. From the other, I could hear the morning bells without being required to answer them. August slept in a cradle beside my bed. Avis had named no supernatural condition at his birth. She treated him as she would any premature infant. Warmth, careful feeding, clean linen, watchfulness. He was small but healthy, very pale, with clouded blue-gray eyes and fine silver blonde hair darkening at the roots. Beneath his left collarbone lay a wine-red crescent no larger than my thumbnail. I touched the mark once, then covered it with clean linen. One morning, a parishioner entered the infirmary carrying broth and stopped when she saw me beside the cradle.
Father Severin?
My hand rose toward my throat. There was no collar. August stirred at the sound. His small fingers tightened in the blanket. I turned to him instead of correcting the woman. The old penitential chain came out of the crypt piece by piece. Ephraim objected when I asked the smith to cut it.
You mean to put that iron near the child?
I mean to make it useful.
The smith forged the links into a removable brace for the cradle rail and a guarded latch that could be closed from outside if August ever became dangerous during a hunger episode. Every edge was rounded. The cuff became a broad, protective plate lined with leather. Nothing touched his skin. The key hung from my watch chain on, rather than from a hook beyond reach. I wound the black rosary around the outer cradle rail where I could reach it while holding him. The beads no longer cut my palm unless I chose to close my hand too hard. At night, I wrote the history of the Wycliffe curse in plain language. Morwenna Ainsworth, Edric Wycliffe, Cecily Rook, Gideon and Rosamond, Audilie. Beside Gideon's name, I wrote that he shot himself and left my mother to scrub the floor. Beside Audilie's, I wrote that she forced a vow, planned for a child, opened her own wound, and died while I fed. Beside mine, I wrote that I had promised to live. When the ink dried, I added the date and wrote the same promise again. Months passed. August learned the sound of my steps and quieted when I lifted him. His silver blonde hair thickened. His eyes cleared toward storm gray, though at certain angles they held his mother's pale blue. He gripped my finger with surprising strength. He slept best when the bells rang. His gaze followed bells, lamplight, and my face with equal curiosity. I marked each quiet day and gave it no name. At dawn one winter morning, I tested the new cradle latch after the smith had returned it for adjustment. The mechanism caught halfway. I pressed harder. A rough edge opened my thumb. One bead of blood appeared. August's eyes turned toward it. His mouth opened. I closed my hand instead of looking away.
I hope I kept you company with my story. It would mean so much for you to like and subscribe because it helps me make more. I'll see you in the next one.